Hello, everyone. My name is Stephen Blackburn from District Administration, and welcome to our webinar here today, which is entitled Curbing Chronic Absenteeism, How Alternative Student Transportation Makes a Difference. And all this is brought to you by the generous support of our sponsor with us here today, EverDriven. Now, for some very quick housekeeping items before we get to the main event, I'll make sure to keep this brief. At the end of our main event today, there will be a live Q&A with both of our panelists here. You can submit your questions. You can do that now until the very end, and you can do that via the red Ask Question box. It's the one with the question mark and the chat bubbles at the bottom of your screen. After the Q&A, a post-event survey will also launch automatically on your screen, so we do ask that you stay on till the very end. That said, we do know that you have very busy schedules, and if you need to drop off early, you can access that post-event survey by clicking on the pink box. So please do that before you go. We'd love to hear from you. You can also safely download some resources that are related to today's event, including an asset with 4 actions your district can take today to reduce chronic absenteeism. And you can do that by clicking on the blue box there with the paperclip, also at the bottom of your screen. And lastly, you'll be pleased to know that everyone who's here today and everyone who's registered, all of you will receive an email tomorrow from us at DA. And that email, it will include a link to the slides as well as the on-demand video. So look out for that in your inboxes. And now it is my pleasure to introduce both of our speakers. We have Courtney Pilata, who is Chief Marketing Officer at EverDriven. And we have with us Ashley Riley, who is EverDriven's McKinney-Vento Homeless Liaison. Well, it's great to have both of you with us. And now I'll pass things off to you, Ashley.
Thank you so much, Steve. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on curbing chronic absenteeism through alternative student transportation. I'm Ashley Riley, and as someone who works directly with McKinney-Vento students and liaisons across the country, I'm so glad you're here. Let me start off with a story. This actually just happened a few weeks ago. I was meeting with the homeless liaison when she got a call. A student had just been identified as McKinney-Vento. And in that moment, I watched everything shift. She went from our strategic meeting and conversation to scrambling, calling over to the transportation department, weighing options over the phone. I actually overheard her say, maybe we can route them on a traditional bus. Maybe a taxi would work. But in this particular state, in order to take a taxi, the parent would have to ride along. So that wasn't possible for this situation. Days went by, she updated me, and unfortunately, that kiddo missed all 5 days of school. When transportation breaks down, everything breaks down. The student's education gets disrupted. Families, they lose trust in the system, and dedicated professionals like that homeless liaison spend their time managing logistics instead of doing what they do best, which is supporting students. That story captures exactly why we are here today. We're going to explore how transportation barriers are often invisible to those who haven't experienced them, but they create a ripple effect that extends far beyond just getting from point A to point B. I'm going to kick us off with an opening poll. Let me walk you through what we're going to cover first, though. Today, we're going to cover the link between chronic absenteeism and transportation challenges. I'm also going to touch on why chronic absenteeism often signals unidentified McKinney-Vento students as well. We're also going to go through why traditional transportation models cannot meet every student's need. Also, we're going to go through how alternative transportation can be customized to support underserved and at-risk students. We will also share some practical solutions that Stephen mentioned that districts are actually implementing right now. So let's get to the poll. On a scale of 1 to 5, how much is chronic absenteeism impacting your district? 5 being the most and 1 being the least.
And I'll just jump in really quick while we wait. So the poll is actually in the slide area to everyone in the audience. So just click directly on your screen there where you see the questions. If you're not able to click directly on the slide, you can submit your answers in the attendee chat. But yes, please click directly on the slide, and we have about 19% of you. So we'd like a little bit more, but thank you very much for your participation.
We'll give it a few more minutes to chime in.
I mean, we are inching up to 50%. Okay, there we go. Oh, now we're over 50. Awesome.
All right, that number is starting to slow down, so I'm going to see what these results are. Wow, okay, 23% out of 5, 435.9, and 329.5. This is not surprising to us whatsoever. Thank you all for chiming in on that poll. And thank you again for being here. Transportation barriers are often invisible to those who don't face them, but their impact on attendance, on engagement, on academic outcomes is massive. This isn't just a logistics problem. This is a system problem that requires system thinking. Let's start with the reality check. When we hear chronic absenteeism, we may think, oh, maybe that student just isn't motivated. Maybe they just don't want to learn and go to school, or maybe it's the parents' fault. It must be family engagement. But these numbers tell a different story. Courtney, can you walk us through these next few slides and tell us what the data is showing?
Absolutely. And I think based on some of the responses that folks have offered in this poll, you're probably at your desk nodding your head to go, yeah, wow, it's really significant. So they may or may not surprise you, but let's talk a little bit about what chronic absenteeism means. If you think about a 180-day school year, that's missing 10% of your days in school. That's 18 days of the school year. So it's not 50, it's not 100. Chronic absenteeism and its impacts can affect students with at least 18 days missing in a school year. And then going beyond that, which is the latest version of our Department of Education data, this actually affects almost 30% of students. Almost 30% of students in the 2022-2023 school year were chronically absent, missing at least those 18 days of school or far more. And then finally, if you think about, and fast forward, we'll have new data soon when released, that's 3 out of 4 schools reported an increase in their chronic absenteeism rates in 2022. And some of the data that we'll look at on the next slide suggests that that is actually, I don't think any of us would be surprised to see in terms of what we see in our day-to-day lives, that number has continued to grow, and that you may see 8 out of 10 schools reporting that they've seen an increase in absenteeism in recent years. But let's talk about where this is really a challenge. Well, the answer is this is a nationwide challenge. And if you take a look at this slide, you can see, yes, in certain markets and states, is chronic absenteeism more of a challenge than in other places? Yes. Is there any state on this map that's immune? Absolutely not. So you may be sitting here saying, whether your district is in rural Iowa or Denver public schools, this is a real challenge in every single district in this country. And if you dial that back a little bit, let's talk about why that matters. So like, oh, kiddo misses 10 days of school. Well, so what? So what's a lot of what, right? Let's think about slower engagement and academic readiness. School years are designed to educate students in a very methodical way so that they accomplish and achieve the milestones set forward in whatever grade level they're at so they can move on to the next one. And any absenteeism, even when you're sick for a few days, as we all may know as parents, it's a catch-up act. So what happens when a student is chronically absent over time? Well, factually, they're 4 times less likely to graduate high school. So that's very significant. It can really impact your day-to-day performance. How do you get through this class? How do you get through this semester? How do you ultimately get through a certain grade? And then finally, if you think about the long-term impacts of said thing, when chronic absenteeism is something that continues to pervade certain districts, it has a real impact on ability to attain jobs, pursue secondary education, and really do the thing that we aim to do in educating students, which is deliver the most positive and bright outcome for students coming out of the school system. And every day that you miss and every subject that you fall behind in lessens the chance that that's going to become a reality. And now let's talk about the McKinney-Vento connection. So if you think a little bit about what that means, we talked about chronic absenteeism. If you think about students who are part of the McKinney-Vento program, nearly half of those experiencing homelessness were also chronically absent. So the McKinney-Vento population and chronic absenteeism are, for better or worse, very, very tightly intertwined. And Ashley is going to go into some examples in detail here, but not only is this, it is like placing a microscope on top of chronic absenteeism and saying at 22 points higher are MKV students absent. In this country, that's more than, it's almost 1.5 million K-12 students are experiencing some sort of homelessness. So to give you a sense of the breadth of this challenge, which many of you realize in your day-to-day lives, that means we have more than 650,000 students chronically absent and missing school, possibly missing opportunities to make the progress that they absolutely deserve. And that's why we're all here, right? I think that I'm giving these stats to offer a reality check, but if you think about kind of a change in tone here, there are fantastic ways to improve this outcome, and we're going to explore some of those on this call.
And those numbers really reflect exactly what I'm seeing in the field every day. Students experiencing homelessness, they're going to face chronic absenteeism at rates that are significantly higher than their housed peers. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of students nationally. And these kids aren't disengaged by choice. This is a systematically disconnected. Picture a family that's staying in a hotel, and I'm sure plenty of you have heard a similar story within your districts. Picture a family living in a motel outside of a traditional bus route, or maybe you have a teen that's doubled up living at a relative's place across town from their school of origin. McKinney-Vento Act guarantees transportation, but actually delivering, that's where it breaks down and students fall through the cracks. Courtney, what are districts telling you when they reach out about these challenges?
I mean, based on the research that is both publicly available and that EverDriven has focused on conducting, we have a couple of key drivers here that suggest that this is a challenge that is only growing and affects many, many students. But one, 88% of districts are challenged with figuring out how to solve for this population with a bus, okay? So how do you use an existing bus route to solve for a student who may not fit any given route on more than one day in a week? And then you've got almost 60% say that MKV students are growing faster than your in-house capabilities can support. Whether you have a series of alternative options, whether you're using small buses and cars and taxis and yellow buses, there is nothing to change the fact that the pace of students needing support is growing more quickly than districts' ability to flex and scale. And that a bus driver shortage, which I think anyone here who's dealing with transportation has been hearing about loudly for the past couple of years, but not only are bus routes a challenge, but availability of bus drivers in general, even if that did meet the need, that's a real reality check and challenge. And then finally, costs. I think that everyone here, we all work and manage to budgets. And if you think about the combination of a rising population that is pretty volatile in terms of what it needs every day, as well as cost coming up, it creates a pretty unique situation for anybody responsible for transportations to start to think really creatively about how to solve. How do we keep costs down and support the flexibility that students like this and that districts need in being able to meet the needs of every student?
Now let's explore what's causing these challenges. This brings us to a really critical point. Why school buses, which have been the backbone of student transportation for decades, sometimes can't meet every student's needs. And Courtney, from what we're seeing here, what are the pressure points?
I think you have a couple of points, which are buses' capabilities are limited. They're limited in terms of how many students they can service on a route. They're limited by the number of buses available in a district. They are limited by the number of students that they can put on the bus. So the capabilities of the bus have at least a trifold series of risks associated with them. And the challenge with drivers is very, very real. So it's very hard for many districts these days to scale their yellow bus operation in a way that feels like it's efficient, even if that could meet the needs of a more transient population. And then finally, we see this all the time. I mean, this happens to be core to our business at EverDriven, but parents, like anybody in life that uses any sort of tech to do their jobs every day, parents want more visibility. They want more visibility into understanding where's their kiddo? Are they safe? When should I expect them? Is the bus late? Is the driver late? Are we going to be there on time? Because we as consumers have gotten very used to that behavior. And the truth is that is what parents expect in the transportation of their kids.
Exactly. And those pressure points, they play out in a very real way for all of our students. When a McKinney-Vento student can't access traditional bus services, I will tell you, they often just don't come to school. It's as simple and as devastating as that. I've seen too many cases where we lose students, not because they don't want to learn, but because we couldn't figure out how to get them from point A to point B reliably. And here's the thing, I know we're talking numbers here, but this isn't just about the attendance numbers. We're talking about real kids with real dreams watching their education slip away because of something as basic and solvable as transportation. Here's what gives me hope, though, Courtney. Districts are recognizing this challenge and actively looking for solutions. I'm seeing everything from gift cards for parents to use for rideshare services or gas. I'm seeing homeless liaisons coordinate carpool networks with families, and also partnerships with alternative transportation provider. The key insight that I've learned and the advice that I would give is that we need to match the solution to the specific barrier. A student who needs to go to their school of origin, let's say that's about 20 to 25 miles away, may have a different solution or may need a different solution than a student whose bus stop is just too far from their temporary housing. I want to go to the next slide here. This slide is about alternative transportation and how it reduces chronic absenteeism for students. So it's who does it really help? This slide shows exactly what alternative transportation serves best. These aren't abstract categories. These are real students with real barriers. When traditional buses can't accommodate specialized needs, or when housing is off of regular routes, or when an address changes faster than the transportation system can track, that's where alternative solutions step in. The key principle remains, we have to match the student with the solution. So what barrier they have, we have to match it with that specific solution. Different students, different challenges, different transportation needs. It's about having the right tool so that no student falls through the cracks because of where they may be sleeping that night. On the next slide here, these numbers, they really tell a powerful story about why districts are actively seeking alternative transportation. Courtney, you're hearing districts, what are you hearing the challenges from these districts? Can you walk us through what's driving these percentages?
I think the number, I mean, certainly we're seeing it, so I don't think it will state it, is the ability, the absolute necessity to meet students' evolving needs. And I think, Ashley, you highlighted this. You talked about how alternative transportation has sort of come to be. And if you think about this, I'm really curious to get folks' input during the Q&A on this topic. If you put the student's need at the center, modern student transportation actually is going to look like a combination of things, right? We're going to talk about what some of those solutions are going to look like. But the bus is not at the center, right? You think about a lot of models where someone goes, okay, transport students on the bus. That's the center. And then the students are kind of the outside of that diagram. I think we are now very clearly in a world where the student and their needs are the center of a modern student transportation strategy. And then what's on the outside are the options. What is the best way for each child to get to school? So the data clearly says that evolving student need dynamic is absolutely top of the list. And districts also need to figure out how to alleviate this limited bus driver availability. It's not going away. Has it improved since COVID? Yes. Has it gotten a little bit better? Is it something that's scalable? No. So you see districts needing both flexibility and scale. And then finally, the ability to accommodate every type of kiddo, a gen ed student, a special education student. How do we figure out ways to provide, no matter what sort of student you are, the access to the same equitable, on-time, trusted route to school that every student should count on? It's logical.
And absolutely, Courtney. And I'd love to pause here for just a moment. I'd love to hear from the audience again. If you all can put in the chat the solutions that you're using or seeing. And there's no wrong answers here. We are all doing our best with the same goal in mind, and that's to get the kids to school. So if you all can comment what you're seeing and what you're doing in your districts.
Yeah, what kind of solutions are folks taking advantage of today? Don't worry, because we're going to give you some ideas too. We're also curious.
No wrong answers here. And Courtney, if you're able to read those off, if you can see them.
Well, I think we've got a couple. Oh, look at that. Just like the survey, I think it takes a second. Private transportation. We've got private transportation services. We'll talk a little bit about that. Private transportation bus services, city bus passes. Wow. So one district is small enough that a school transport director can go out in a van, pick kiddos up. And we've got van drivers in addition to buses. We've got MARTA cards. I'm pretty sure that's Atlanta, I'm guessing, because I don't know. I've ridden MARTA. Bus passes. So a lot of creativity. We've got someone in here who's been picking students up themselves.
Exactly.
Absolutely amazing. And not a surprise. I'm sure that it's absolutely amazing. So a lot of solutions there. And what we'll do is, Ashley, I can take us to the next slide, bus and taxi. Let's talk about the way in which we've categorized, based on what we've learned, the sorts of solutions, many of which fit in to this model. One, semi-personalized bus service. So that may be a smaller bus. That might be a large van. That could be any sort of vehicle that can transport a couple of kids, but be more flexible to routes that are both changing in terms of their type and the students that need service. And then cabs, taxis, and ride sharing. I mean, I saw a couple of these in here. I see taxi in the list of chatted in answers. It's an interesting solve, right? In some markets, this is a place where taxis or some sort of Uber-like service could provide a solution, and with some risk, but we'll talk about those sorts of things. Private alternative student transportation. Many of you suggested that you're using private transportation as an option. Now, sometimes private transportation is also more busing. It may also be vans. It may also be private transportation like we talk about every day at EverDriven, which are, SUVs and vehicles that are well suited to transport children. Carpooling, something that each of us, I'm sure, try to take advantage of. And finally, gift cards for parents to cover gas and mileage costs for you to be able to get your kiddo to and from school if that's an option. So I will pause there because I think, Ashley, what I'll do is I'll go to the next slide, because we're going to dive into what each of these models look like and what are some pros and cons as a group of individuals who have to weigh every decision like this and say which one is right for me and my district. All right, over to you, Ashley.
And I notice a pattern. I love this solutions breakdown, and I'm glad we color coded it. I noticed a pattern earlier overlooking it again. The boxes that are in the red, to me, they mean more time taken away from the homeless liaison. More coordination burden a solution places on a liaison. It takes away from their core responsibilities of identifying additional McKinney-Vento students to curb absenteeism. So in those red boxes, you're going to have your homeless liaison turn into almost a transportation director or dispatch. And then the greener your boxes are, then you're going to have them have that time back to identify those students who are falling through the cracks. And, while some of the models are going to appear a little bit more expensive, and they often cost more in the long run, though, I'm sorry, let me re-say that. And while some of the models here that you see, it appears like they're less expensive up front, they cost more in the long run. And what I mean by that is it costs in missed instruction time, lost students because there isn't a tracking system, and your liaison burnout. I spoke to a liaison over in Alabama that had to spend 90% of her day coordinating rides. So of course they have children falling through the cracks because their liaison is now the transportation director. So if you're looking at the chart here, alternative transportation makes the biggest impact for these three populations. We're talking students with specialized transportation needs that buses can't accommodate. We're seeing students living in temporary housing situations off traditional routes. We're seeing students whose addresses change frequently due to housing instability. Courtney, when these systems work, what's driving the success?
Well, this is the thing we all want to talk about. So maybe I'm very happy that I get to talk about this slide and this content, which is what are the real benefits? I mean, we are going to talk a lot about transport because it is a means to an outcome. But what are the outcomes? Why do any of us do this all day long? Because we believe that access to education is going to be a very singular path to better outcomes. And what actually happens? What does data actually show you happens when students are able to attend school and chronic absenteeism is curbed? Higher attendance rates, very obviously. They're at school. I think Ashley's example of trying to find a kiddo a ride and then having 5 days be missed while that gets figured out is like a very obvious example, even though the solution may eventually be transport, even just a few missed days while that gets figured out. So predictable higher attendance rates, higher engagement in the classroom. You have kids that are finding their way to school, and that's the place they have a warm meal in the day. So they're both having breakfast, they're engaged in the classroom, they're there repeatedly. So they feel confident to participate in class in the way that we want them to. Stronger graduation rates. I'm going to offer an anecdote on this, which is 3 weeks ago, maybe a month ago, we had our McKinney-Vento liaison, a customer of ours in the Kansas City, Kansas Public School District, Jessica Smith, join us here in Denver for a town hall and to share some of her experiences as liaison. And one of the first things she said to me in the kitchen before we even got into talking about the stuff we were going to do on site is that she had been so excited because she just had attended graduation the weekend prior, and that her MKV population of high schoolers actually graduated at a 2-point higher graduation rate than the rest of the district, which is amazing. You think about that and you're going, what's the impact of this work? The impact is those students graduated even at a higher rate than the entire district as a whole. So when done right, stronger graduation rates are a real meaningful outcome. Improved district scores for sure, because you have more engaged students who are more present, who are meeting milestones and can test better. And then obviously, which is an outcome of said thing, increased district funding. I don't think by 100 days at EverDriven, I've heard of or spoken to any district for whom funding was not a challenge. No matter what it is, whether it's transport or curriculum or anything else. And those sorts of outcomes both obviously benefit a student and also really benefit the district, which in turn allows the district to do even a better job with the students they support.
And Courtney, this list reflects exactly what I'm advocating for in my conversations with districts. When alternative transportation works well, and I've seen it work beautifully, the transformation is remarkable. The key to success isn't just having the option, but having systems that work seamlessly so students can focus on learning and not logistics. I worked with a district that had a student who was missing 30 to 40% of her school days because of temporary housing. It wasn't on any of the bus routes. Within 2 weeks of setting her up and connecting her with reliable transportation, she was able to achieve perfect attendance all 2 weeks. But here's what's really powerful about that. It wasn't just the numbers. that changed. It was her confidence grew, her participation in class increased, her relationship with her teachers strengthened, and transportation was the foundation that made everything else possible. I'm going to go into our next slide here. These are 4 takeaways that you can start today, and this is based on what I've seen consistently across several districts. The 4 strategies that you can implement. First one is be physically present when patterns emerge. So we want to meet students where they are. You don't want to wait for students to come to you. I'll give you an example. Here in Memphis, where I live, the homeless liaisons developed an outreach program called Hey Neighbor. Now, they were actually going door to door in the highest risk neighborhoods for truancy, and they were there to have a conversation with the community. Why are kids missing school? What is the actual burden here? What's going on? So this wasn't about a compliance visit. It was about building relationships in communities where the students actually live. Now, I'm not saying that we should all get out there in neighborhoods and knock on doors, but that is one way to meet your students where they are. Being physically present in a high-risk school as well, and actually using, what I like to do is use a discrete method with QR codes. So it's just a small piece of paper with a QR code on there that a child can scan, and it'll come up with all of the benefits and rights that they have, including transportation, including food services that they have access to. But we want to be discreet because, of course, we want to preserve their dignity. So those work really well in outreach. If you're not sure if a student is experiencing homelessness, there's always those signs. Of course, are they wearing the same clothes to school every day? Are they complaining about hunger pains? There's several ways to find out if a student is eligible for McKinney-Vento, but if you aren't sure, why not give them that QR code where they can have access and actually understand that they can get to school? Another way is just simple flyers. I've seen homeless liaisons with the simple flyers that have the information on it. But this allows families to access help privately without the stigma, and that is so important. But the key was making sure that families knew what was available for them before it's even needed. The next strategy here is audit your last mile barrier. Look at your current transportation contracts carefully. Does your provider drop students off a mile from the school? Do you see attendance patterns spiking during bad weather? That last mile between where transportation ends and school begins can be the difference between attendance and an absence. Some districts have addressed this with alternative transportation solutions. I've seen districts address this with micro routes as well, and they handle those final connections. And I'm going to go to the next screen for number 3. So we want to proactively offer transportation. Don't wait to ask. Make transportation offers proactive, not reactive. Students should never have to guess if they're eligible for transportation support. If you work with high schoolers, you know that they are least likely to self-identify, that you really have to pay attention to what they're saying, what they're doing, and their behaviors to know if they're looking like they would be eligible to be a part of the McKinney-Vento benefits. So we want to make sure that we're really focused on those students who may seem like they are very independent, but don't realize that they could be benefiting as well. We want to build transportation conversations into your McKinney-Vento intake process as well. And you can just create a simple, accessible ways for families to understand their options before they miss a day of school. Going back to that QR code, it is something that is very discreet that families really appreciate. And if they don't need it, that's totally fine, but it's about the power of the knowledge. Strategy number 4, spend less time finding rides and more time finding students. Reclaim your liaisons' time. This is critical. When liaisons spend hours each week arranging individual rides, they can't do the relationship building work that only they can do. They can't identify students who need support, and they can't follow up with academic progress. So some districts are addressing this by hiring dedicated transportation coordinators or by partnering with providers who handle logistics. The return on that investment, more students are identified, better support provided. A stronger case for your continued funding. And a way that you can do that is making sure as a homeless liaison or an administrator or teacher that you're actually taking notes every time that you have a missed opportunity for identifying a student because you had to find transportation for that student. Write that down, and it's a perfect way to build your case for additional funding. I bring that up because I know a lot of you are thinking, this sounds great, Ashley, but how do I get a buy-in from my administration? I would say start with a pilot. Choose 10 to 15 McKinney-Vento students who are currently missing school due to transportation barriers and test one of the solutions that we spoke about. It could be the gas cards, it could be the rideshare program, the carpooling, or alternative transportation provider. I would highly recommend that you test this for 60 to 90 days and make sure you're tracking 3 things. You want to attract you want to track the attendance rates before and after. You want to track how many hours you're spending on coordinating transportation with the solution that you're testing, and the opportunities that you missed because you were handling logistics instead of supporting students. And then compare it. When you coordinate time, when your coordination time decreases, your identification and support time increases. That's your story. That's your return on your investment. And the return isn't just abstract, it's measurable. It's an improved attendance. It's in a better academic outcomes. It's an increased funding through better identification. And you know what? It's also stronger communities when students stay connected to their education. So this may say that it may seem like it starts with transportation, and it does. It is the absolute foundation to get the kids to school so that they can eventually go off into the workforce and give back to their communities. So we want them to always stay connected to that education. I want to return to that story that I opened with about transportation breaks down. When transportation breaks down, everything breaks down, but the reverse is also true. When we solve transportation challenges, we create foundation for everything else to work. These barriers may be invisible to many, but they're absolutely solvable. Here's my challenge to everyone here. Choose one action this week. Maybe it's auditing those last mile barriers in your current system. Maybe it's starting the conversation about a pilot program. Maybe it's just simply talking to your teams about where students are getting stuck. Just don't let the status quo be the reason why another student gets left behind. Thank you for the incredibly important work you do every day, and for showing up for students, and for staying committed to this work, even when it's challenging, and I know it is, and for being here today and learning and sharing with each other. Courtney, would you like to open it up for questions?
Yeah, we're going to absolutely take some questions. And Ashley, I want to thank you for the takeaways that you're sharing here. I think one of the points of feedback we received is like, not everyone has access to like more funding or more people to help solve for the things. And I think your lens here is really saying, be creative about what's possible. Be present in a high school where it's harder to discern whether or not, a child needs a ride, and just start asking some of those probing questions. That actually was the thing Jessica said really drove a whole lot of participation in the MKV program for high schoolers, which is when you started to have eyes on kids that were either like kind of missing school, seem like all of the attributes that you suggested, just letting them know that this is an option by physically putting eyes on a person and saying, hey, do you know you have this option to get to school? And then all of a sudden these kids are showing up and they're at school every day. They just didn't know. I think that part of the challenge is that the availability of this resource, because this is not a population who is what people would say as homeless. A lot of times it's housing unstable. So everything is in flux. And as a result, they don't know they're eligible for something like this. And it is exactly for students like this. And just being visible and present, and
knowledge is power.
Yeah. It can really drive a much more positive outcome. So let's move over to questions. We have time here for questions. I think we're going to turn it over to Stephen, and he is going to talk a little bit about that. Before doing so, the reason you see our two faces here with email addresses, if there's anything today you heard, you have a question about, you want to talk further about, you just want to have a discussion, feel free to reach out to Ashley or myself. our contact information is here.
Perfect. Great. Yes. Thank you, Courtney. Yeah, as I was saying, excuse me, we're at the live Q&A portion of the presentation. If you haven't submitted your question yet, just click on the Ask Question box at the bottom of your screen. I'm highlighting it now so you can find it more easily. If you don't currently have a question, you can just listen in, or you can also take this time to look at some of the related content that's also at the bottom of your screen. I'm going to highlight that now, the blue paperclip. But let's currently focus on the questions that came in from our audience. I'll go through those now. Let's see. Let's go with this question first, and we have quite a few of them here. What are your thoughts on outsourcing to private transport providers, like cost savings, support in general? And I am going to jump to this slide because I know it came in early during the presentation, and this may have answered it, but I'll still ask the question now for a little more insight on that.
Awesome. Ashley, do you want me to take a first pass here and then jump in? Does that sound good?
Sure, go for it. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, I mean, pros and cons, outsourcing to private transportation. Obviously, you can see some pros and cons here. But if you think about some of the challenges districts face, it is very, very often the inability to scale. So they are trying to meet the unique needs of a student at the center of our diagram, with what they have. And the benefit of working with private student transportation, I'll be very specific, private student transportation, is that organizations, companies like that are towing the line on safety and regulations as dictated by the Department of Education in many scenarios. Certainly at EverDriven, this is true. And you want to vet for that. But there can be a real benefit in being able to give you that extensibility to say as a district, hey, listen, if my existing footprint of what is true of our district is not enough, let's have an option that allows us to flex on demand for the variety of student populations that we serve. And if you think about an alt transportation provider, the reality is you're going to get an equal or better level of safety and compliance. That's what these companies are in business to do. And you're going to be able to scale up or down on demand, I would say, are some of the initial benefits. And I think if you want to think about a pro and a con, is there cost associated with that? Yes. But I think organizations like this can be incredibly efficient in terms of thinking about routing, potentially even as good as or better than some bus routing type teams. And over time, that cost becomes something that has a real return on investment.
Absolutely, Courtney. I was actually going to touch on that, the return on investment. Although private transportation costs a bit more, the return on investment is priceless. Not only are they going to get that attendance that they get from the state, that attendance funding, but also, like I said, they're going to see this showing up in their communities as well in the long run with their workforce. They're going to see higher graduation rates. They're going to see more funding for their school, to the point where that investment that you put in, you've seen more than a return on that. So I do agree with you there.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And I will say really quick before going to the next question, if anyone doesn't have any questions right now, before you log off, I just want to make sure that you can take part in the post-event survey. So I'm going to highlight that at the bottom of your screen. So before you jump off, if you don't have a question, please take that survey because we'd love to hear from you. All right, let's go to this next question. It's a nice one. So what strategies can be used for students who are not registered as McKinney-Vento? So they may be doubling up on housing with family or renting rooms with others. Sometimes they are in temporary living situations. There has been, not funding to help students who don't identify as homeless. Great question.
Sure. So if they are living in a doubled up situation, that actually does qualify them for McKinney-Vento benefits. So with that said, it's all about them having that knowledge that they have those rights. As I mentioned earlier, if they are high school or sometimes even middle school children won't self-identify. So it's all about training your staff and your teachers to be able to identify a student who may be McKinney-Vento eligible, because in situations where they are doubled up, maybe at aunt's house, you are still eligible to get McKinney-Vento benefits through that.
Great. let's go to this next question. So it usually takes us generally 3 weeks to get a bus coordinated. In the meantime, the absences are accumulating. In classroom instruction by the teacher is so vital. What suggestions do you have there?
You want to take that one, Courtney?
Yes, sorry. I was like having a hard time getting my thing off. I mean, I'm going to go back to the flexibility option, which is if you have the opportunity. I don't know. I'm not going to comment on how you can influence a faster outcome on bus because that's different district to district. But what I would say, and what we see a lot, is having the ability to flex into even an interim ride solution. What, like at EverDriven, what we'll do is we may provide, several weeks of a ride to a kiddo that we can spin up in a couple of days. And then if it turns out that that kiddo can go on a bus, that's okay. But there is always the option to say, how do we get this child to school right away? The long-term solution may be a car. It may also be a bus. But with some private transportation solutions, certainly with ours, you're going to be able to find a student a ride. And if you need to do it, I mean, ideally it'd be like a few days, you could do that in a couple of days. So giving yourself the flexibility to adjust on demand is one of the primary benefits we hear districts giving us.
Exactly, Courtney. And if you're going to hire a private transportation provider, make sure that they can have that turnaround in 48 hours. We should never be waiting 3 weeks for a kiddo to get consistent transportation to school. So make sure before you sign those contracts that you're looking to see what that turnaround time actually is. Is it McKinney-Vento compliant? So that's really important. We never want to wait that long to get them back into school, but especially past the 48-hour mark is way too long.
And I think to maybe just go real quick, while this is not what we do every day, but we hear people do it, things that were shared in the chat today, city bus passes, access to parents to drive, like there are things you could try to accelerate in the interim to try to also get that child to school, in addition to some of the private transport options. So some of it is like you have to be a little bit creative. But I think the key is clearly everyone here has stated that's too long for a student to have to wait. What can you do in the interim? Sorry, go ahead, Stephen.
No, definitely. That was a great add-on, so no worries. Let's go with this next question. Do you recommend that, so special ed students with individual transportation in their IEP, should they also be put on regular ed buses? Do you recommend that?
I think it depends on the particular student, especially a student with an IEP. It depends on exactly what is needed during their ride. Do we need to customize the ride for them? What are their needs? Do they do well on a traditional school bus? Would they do better with private transportation? So I would take it down to customization for that particular student. We actually started off as a special needs provider. So we service several special needs kiddos, and I can tell you that every one of them are so unique. So you want to make sure that you have a private transportation provider, if you choose to go that route, that can make those customizations down to what the radio station will be on for them. So it really depends. If they do great on a school bus, then, of course. But if they need that private transportation, if they do better in a car, then absolutely go that route. But we're going to have to put what the student needs first.
Awesome. Great answer there. And I will say, so right now I'm currently seeing one more question was completely fine, but I will just remind everyone who's still on is to feel free, if you don't have a question, check out the related content that's at the bottom of your screen. I'm highlighting that right now. And also, again, to take the post-event survey, I'm also highlighting that as well so you can find them easily. But again, if you have any questions before I close out, feel free to continue asking them. And even if we don't get to them today, we at DA will make sure that we will share your questions to our partners at EverDriven. So yeah, feel free to continue submitting any questions that you have. Let's go with this one really quick. So in school systems, in our school system, there is liability in utilizing some forms of transportation, that have been discussed, like private transportation. So in that case, like who would pay for like a cab or an Uber? Would it be the school system, or how does that work?
I've seen it done a few ways. I've seen that they give the parents the gift cards and the parents will book Ubers that way. I've also seen where even liaisons, when they have no other choice, will try to use the cabs or the Uber. The liability, no matter what, it goes back on the district. Even if it's a parent carpool that a liaison has put together, even if it's teachers offering rides, that liability still goes back on the district. So you want to make sure whenever you are coordinating those trips and bringing on that third party, if you choose to go that route again, that they are able to be compliant within your district's with your district's liability. So as I said, it goes back to the district, even if they are booking the Ubers or giving them the gift cards.
Awesome, thank you. It looks like we did get a few more questions that came in during that time, so I guess that call out worked. So thank you, everyone in the audience. Let's go to this one. So how does private student transportation differ from cabs, ride sharing, when it comes to reducing chronic absenteeism? Does one do a better job than the other, and what does that look like?
I've been talking a lot. You want to take that one?
Yeah, I'm going to start with one comment. If you were to put all those things on the sort of a similar level, and part of this puts the action on anybody who's here on this call, private student transportation providers are beholden to a set of regulations and requirements to transport children that are inherently different from what a taxi and Uber services that service the general public are need to work on every day. And I think the power in that is if you choose, and you should always vet it. Any vendors who's in this space should be able to provide you with what their checklist looks like relative to safety, driver vetting, vehicle inspection, safety records, on-time trips. Like, these are questions you should ask, but they are businesses that are built from the ground up to serve students. So as districts think about assuming risk, Ashley just talked about this in the answer to her last question. At the end of the day, even if you run a carpool, the district is still responsible for that. So there are companies out there who understand that and say, we want to do as good or better than the transportation you already have in your district. Let's say it's a bus. And they are absolutely towing the line on regulations and compliance. And I think if you ask that question and you can't get the right answer, it should raise a question mark, because you want to be cautious about how you transport poor kids. And I'll leave one other comment, like a very simple one that we see a lot here. You have a lot of buses today that have cameras on the bus. And those cameras provide, and we talked about it, this desire in the beginning of the presentation for caregivers and for staff and for districts, a level of visibility and trust that allows you to really understand what's happening in near real time on any given ride with any given student. You have a lot of private transportation providers. Well, at EverDriven, we care a lot about this. We also want to provide transparency. So we have like 18% of our cars have in-vehicle cameras to do that same type of thing. So it's just like simply an example of what you should be able to expect when you work with a transportation provider who is very intentionally servicing students.
Great, thank you for that. Great answers, great questions, so thank you. I see maybe one or two more questions. And again, if we run out of time, not a problem. We at DA will make sure that, like I said before, we'll share them with our partners at EverDriven so they can get to your questions after the event if we don't get to them today, because we are almost at the top of the hour. But let's go with this question here. So families that have unstable housing often have a lot on their plate and don't have time to be involved with their child's transportation. What are best practices that help with parent engagement in student transportation?
Ashley, do you want to take a first pass at that? Some things you've seen work well?
Sure. So I really think it goes back to districts' engagement. So what I've seen in the field is schools actually having an after-school program where they are educating parents on what to look for as far as, is your kid skipping school? What is the patterns that we should be looking out for your student? So that's one way to really get them engaged in their transportation patterns. Now, let's say, again, if it's going back to McKinney-Vento students and they don't know what their rights are, another way of doing that is having those open discussions with families after school, or actually having someone present in the school that's able to spread the word, like I said earlier, through those QR codes or those flyers as well. I know you had more to touch on this though, Courtney.
No, I mean, I think that I knew you were going to sort of hit on this. I think that at the end of the day, it's about being really creative and just making sure that you're doing what you can to kind of spread the word and drive.
And actually, if districts are providing that platform for the students and the families, that makes a huge difference.
Perfect. Well, I think that's a great place to end here. We're almost at the top of the hour, so that works out perfectly. As I said, if we didn't get to your question, not a problem. We will make sure that our partners at EverDriven have access to those questions so they can get to them after the event. And I do have some closing slides that I'll go through myself in just a moment, but I'm actually going to, before I do that, so you don't have to watch all of that if you don't need to, I will push out the post-event survey. It should be in the middle of your screen now. So as I go through those closing slides, feel free to start going through that survey now. But first off, I just want to thank you again, to Courtney and Ashley for taking us through, alternative transportation solutions to help our audience curb chronic absenteeism at their districts. It's such a major problem, and I'm glad that so many districts are taking initiative, and I'm so glad that you're here to provide that for them. So thank you for that. And I'd, of course, just like to give another shout out and thank you to our sponsor, EverDriven. And I'd also just like to take a minute to thank you, our audience, for joining us today. For those of you who enjoyed our presentation, we have more webinars and shorter ed talks like this one that are provided by us here at District Administration, which is the leader in editorial coverage of news, current issues, as well as trends in K-12. And I said it earlier on at the beginning of the presentation. I know we've answered it a few times, but I will say one more time that if you would like to watch this presentation again, or for those of you who believe that what you heard today would be helpful to your colleagues, and I'm sure that's very much the case, you'll be pleased to know that yes, we at DA will be sending you an email tomorrow. In that email, it'll include a link to the slides as well as the on-demand recording. So look out for that in your inboxes. So with that, on behalf of DA, this is Stephen Blackburn. Thanks everyone, and thank you again to EverDriven. This was a great presentation, very informative, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.